Hello and welcome to Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. In this session, we'll be looking at economics and the subject of elasticity of demand.
Eko Learners Support, a support program of the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for WAEC and NECO candidates.
So, in this session, we have set some learning objectives. The first of which is that at the end of the session, you will be able to explain elasticity of demand. You'll be able to explain the different elasticity of demand and their measurement. And you'll be able to calculate the coefficient of elasticity of demand. Okay, so first let's start by defining the elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand is essentially a measure of the extent or degree of sensitivity of changes in price to the quantity of a commodity demanded. So here we say it measures the change in quantity of a commodity in response to a factor that impacts or influences demand. These factors basically include the price of the commodity, the income of the consumer, and the price of other commodities, which could either be a substitute or a complement. Now, the price elasticity of demand specifically is a measure of the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a commodity to small changes in price of that commodity. And the income elasticity of demand is the degree of responsiveness of the quantity of a commodity demanded to changes in the income of the consumer. Now, when elasticity is positive, it means the commodity is a normal commodity or a normal good. When it is negative, it is an inferior good. And when it is greater than 1, we say it is a luxury good. Cross-price elasticity of demand, on the other hand, is the responsiveness or the extent or degree of responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a given commodity to changes in price of another commodity. So unlike for income and price elasticities, where you are dealing with one single commodity, in the case of cross-price elasticity, you are dealing with two commodities, where a change in the price of one commodity will have an impact on the quantity demanded of another commodity. Okay? These commodities can either be substitutes to each other or complements. When elasticity is positive or greater than 0, it is a substitute. And when it is negative, when the cross-price elasticity of demand of good A compared to the price of B is negative, then the goods are complements. Let me take that again. When the cross-price elasticity of demand of a good or a commodity A to change in price of another commodity B is positive, then those goods or commodities are substitutes. Whereas if the cross-price elasticity is a negative, then they are complements. Now let's go to how to measure elasticity of demand. The elasticity of demand is essentially measured by its coefficient, okay, and is denoted by the letter capital E. So we have looked at the different elasticities here: elasticity, price elasticity, income elasticity, and cross-price elasticity. So how do we measure the price elasticity of demand and arrive at its coefficient? It is simply by getting the ratio of change in quantity to the ratio of change in price of that particular commodity. So written here, we say it is change where data, of course, is change in quantity demanded of that commodity divided by the quantity of the commodity, and then all divided by the change in price of the commodity divided by the price of the commodity. Okay? And we say the QD there in that formula is the initial value of the commodity demanded. That's the original quantity demanded. And the change in QD or delta QD is the change in quantity demanded, which is the difference between the original or initial quantity demanded and the new quantity demanded. And then price P is the price of the commodity, and delta P is the change in price, which again is the difference between the original price of the or the initial price of the commodity and the current or new price of the commodity. Secondly, the coefficient of elasticity or the coefficient of income elasticity of demand is also the change in quantity, the ratio of the change in quantity demanded to the ratio of the change in income of the consumer. So the difference between the coefficient of income elasticity and that of price elasticity is that for income, we are dealing with the income of the consumer, whereas for price elasticity, we are dealing with the price of the commodity. So, just as we explained for price elasticity of demand, delta QD here is the change in quantity demanded, and is essentially also the difference between the original or initial quantity demanded and the new or current quantity demanded. And delta I. Delta I is the change in the income of the consumer, which is the original or initial income of the consumer, the difference between the original or initial income of the consumer and the current or new income of the consumer. And thirdly, we have the coefficient of cross-price elasticity, where we now deal with two different products. So we are dealing with the quantity of one of the products and the price of the other product. Okay? So measuring the coefficient of cross-price elasticity of demand is basically the ratio of the change in quantity demanded of one commodity to the ratio of the change in price of the other commodity. So delta Q dx here is the change in the quantity of commodity X, and delta Py is the change in the price of commodity Y. Would use examples to explain how this is calculated and what they mean in subsequent slides. What is important is to understand that the coefficient is the measure of elasticity, or what we use to mathematically represent the extent of responsiveness of a factor influencing demand to the quantity demanded. Now, let's break down the formula for each of these. For price elasticity of demand, the change in quantity demanded, as I said, is the difference between the initial, or you could say original quantity, and the new or current quantity divided by the original or initial quantity and multiplied by 100. We are multiplying by 100 because we are representing as a percentage. Okay? And then the change in price is the difference between the original or initial price and the new or current price divided by the original or initial price, and again represented as a percentage. Same with coefficient of income elasticity of demand, where we have the change in quantity demanded, as in the previous case, as the difference between old or original quantity and new quantity divided by the old or original quantity, and the change in income is the difference between the original or initial income and the new income divided by the initial income. But in each case, you must multiply by 100 or represent these values as a percentage. And then for cross-price elasticity, you have the initial change in a commodity X. It could be bread, for example, say the change in the quantity of bread that is purchased when the income of a consumer changes. When the price of another commodity changes. We are talking cross price elasticity. So perhaps you are looking at bread and butter. All right. So we are saying what happens to the quantity of bread that is consumed when the price of butter changes, for example. And that's what we are looking at here. So if we are looking at the quantity of bread, then we say the initial quantity of bread minus the current quantity of bread that is consumed divided by the initial quantity of bread, and then we divide that by the initial price of butter minus the current price of butter divided by the original price of butter or initial price of butter. And again, always represent as a percentage by multiplying by 100.
Acing your WAEC and NECO examinations has been made easy by the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education with the Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO Candidates television program. Join seasoned teachers as they take you through these core subjects, targeting the exact syllabus of WAEC and NECO. Watch Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates through these social media platforms to access more educational content and give their feedback. Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. Pass your examinations with flying colors.
Eko Learners Support, a support program of the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for WAEC and NECO candidates.
So now let's look at these questions to really delve into how elasticity is calculated. Okay, so here we have a table or a schedule that requires us to calculate the price elasticity of demand, the income elasticity to calculate the income elasticity of demand using this table. But first, the first question is asking us to explain and give the formulas for calculating these values. Okay, so as a revision, we have said that the price elasticity of demand is the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a commodity to a change in the price of that commodity. And it is calculated as a ratio of the change in the quantity demanded of that commodity to the price or to the change in price of the commodity. And very simply, it can be calculated by getting the difference between the quantities demanded, the original quantity demanded minus the new quantity demanded divided by the original quantity demanded multiplied by 100, which gives us the change in quantity demanded. And then we also calculate the change in price by getting the difference between the original price and the current price divided by the original price and also expressed by 100. And then we now divide the change in quantity demanded by the change in price of that commodity to get the coefficient of elasticity. Income elasticity is the change in quantity demanded of a commodity, the response that you get when the income of a consumer changes from one level to the other. So income elasticity is essentially the degree of responsiveness or sensitivity or the extent to which the quantity of a commodity will change when the income of a consumer changes. Okay? And then the formula again for calculating it is essentially the ratio of the change in the quantity demanded of that commodity to the change in the income of the consumer, which is, first, you determine the change in the quantity demanded by getting the difference between the original quantity demanded of the commodity and the new quantity demanded divided by the original quantity and multiplied by 100 to express it as a percentage, and then go on to get the change in price by getting the difference between the original price and the new price divided by the original price multiplied by 100 to get the change in price, and then divide the change in quantity demanded by the change in price. The change in quantity demanded by the change in income to get the income elasticity of demand. For cross-price elasticity of demand, you are looking at two different products, which could either be substitutes or complements. Okay? Now, the cross-price elasticity of demand is the degree of responsiveness in the quantity of a product A, say bread, for example, when the price of another commodity B, say butter, changes. So the degree of responsiveness of the quantity demanded of bread to a change in the price of butter in this specific example is cross-price elasticity. And to calculate that, you calculate that rather by the formula for calculating that is the ratio of the change in quantity demanded of the first commodity, say A, or bread, like we said, to the ratio in the price of another commodity, B, or butter in our example. So, cross-price elasticity can be calculated by first getting the change in the quantity demanded of bread and then dividing it by the change in the price of butter, just like we did for income and price elasticities. And then you get the cross-price elasticity. So where we need to now calculate is the same process, so where you will use income elasticity as an example. So we have changes in income for this consumer from period A through to E. And at these different periods, the consumer income changed from 20,000 up to 45,000, and the quantity demanded changed from 120 units to 240 units, showing that as the consumer's income increased, his consumption of the product or commodity also increased. So, income elasticity, we have said, is given as change in quantity demanded to change income elasticity. This should be income, not price. To change in income. So this should be initial change in income elasticity. So this is the income. This is income. This is income. Okay. So first we get the change in the quantity demanded. So the question actually asks us. The question asks us to get price elasticities for specific periods. So what's the first period? The first period is period A to B. From period A to B, consumer income changed from 20,000 to 36,000, and quantity demanded from 120 to 135 units. So the change in quantity demanded, which is initial quantity demanded minus the new quantity demanded, divided by the initial quantity demanded and multiplied as 100. And then the change in income is initial income minus new income all over initial income times 100. So for change in quantity, it is 120 minus 135 because it's changing from A to B. Okay, so we are taking A as the initial and B as the new, and then 20,000 as initial for income and 36,000 as new, and 120 as initial for quantity and 135 as new. So for change in quantity demanded, it is 120 minus 135 divided by 120, going by the formula we have up there and expressed as a percentage, and that gives us 12.5%. And for change in income, this is change in income. It's 20,000 minus 36,000 divided by 20,000, going by this formula here, and multiplied by 100, which is 80%. And if we divided If we divided 12.5 by 80%, we get 0.16. And this is our coefficient of income elasticity of demand for that particular case. Now, for the other, we have from C to D, and from C to D we have 40 to 44 and 160 to 200, and then we have from D to E, which is 44,000 to 45,000 and 200 to 240. So for the second one, which is from 40,000 to 44,000 for quantity, this is income again. It should be income. Okay, so change in quantity demanded is from 160 to 200, and that gives us 25% change. And then the change in income is from 40,000 to 44,000, and that gives us a 10% change, which gives us an income elasticity E of 2.5. And then in the third case, it's from 200 to 240 for the quantity, and that change represents a 20% change. And for income is from 44,000 to 45,000, which gives us a 2.3% change, and that makes our coefficient of elasticity of income elasticity to be 8.7. So if we go back to our definition originally, we said the coefficient of elasticity for income can either be greater than 1 or less than 1. Okay? So in all of these cases, it is greater, and therefore we say these are all normal goods. The same thing if we had been asked to calculate if the value had been priced. The same process we will go through if it had been priced. For example, instead of income, if this had been the price of the commodity, the only thing we may have seen in this table is that, going by the law of demand, the quantities demanded would have fallen as the prices increased, but we would have also be able to calculate the coefficient of price elasticity just going by the same formula. So instead of having income, we'd be having instead of having income in our formula, we'll be having price. If it was cross price elasticity too, the difference in the table will be that we'll have two different products, and we'll see those examples as we go on. So, in this table now, we have a table that shows two different products. We have, or three different products, or two sets of products rather, where one set gives us the price and the other set of products gives us the quantity demanded. So we are to use the table to calculate the cross price elasticity of demand for different sets of products. So we have bread and yam, beef and fish, butter and margarine. So for the first set, bread and yam, we are taking, of course, what we have, the information we have from the table for bread, the price of bread, and then the information we have for yam, the quantity of yam. Okay? Now, we have the original price and the new price for bread. We have the original quantity and the new quantity for yam. The cross price elasticity of demand for bread and yam would therefore be calculated using the formula that says that we get the ratio of the change in the quantity demanded of yam and then compare it to the ratio of change in price of bread. Okay, so we therefore come here to say bread and yam, change in quantity of bread, if we go back to that table, in the quantity of yam rather, is from 150 to 200, the original 150, it increased to 200, when the price of bread increased from 15 to 20. So the change in the quantity is therefore 150 minus 200 over 150 expressed as a percentage, and that gives us 33.3%. And then the change in price, which is from 15 to 20, also gives us 33.3%. Therefore, the cross price elasticity of demand for bread and yam is 33% over 33%, which gives us 1. Now, the second one is to do for beef and fish. We just go through the same process. We have information we have for beef is the price from 25 to 40, and then for fish, the quantity changed from 1,000 to 3,000. So, if you impute those figures, the change in quantity from 250 to 400, the ratio of the change gives us 60%, and the ratio of change in price from 100 to 150 gives us 50%, and that is 1.2. Sorry. From the change in quantity for fish is 1,000 to 3,000, and that gives us a 60% change. And then the change in price for beef is 3.3%. Okay? Whereas the third one, which is butter and margarine, gives us the ratio of change in quantity is 60%, and the ratio in change of price for butter is 50%, and the cross price elasticity is 1.2. I hope this is clear. The formula is all you need to understand, and then define all the parameters in the formula and impute the values as provided, and then calculate. But always remember to express your figures as percentages by multiplying by 100. So this brings us to the end of this session. If you have comments or observations for us, you can reach us on our social media handles displayed on the screen.